Silence can be heavier than any scream, and I carried it with me for a lifetime. Sometimes I wonder how my body endured so many years without speaking, how my hands kept watering the garden while my soul was crumbling inside. Now, at 74 years old, I dare to break it. I don't do it for myself. I've already learned to live with scars, but because I know my time is running short, and I don't want my grandchildren to grow up without knowing the truth that marked me since I was a child. If you're listening to this, I ask you something before I continue. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps me keep sharing memories like mine. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? My name is Margaret Louise Allen, though here in my neighborhood people simply know me as the old lady who walks slowly and waters her plants every afternoon. Nobody suspects that behind my calm there is an old knot, a weight that neither sunshine nor my grandchildren's laughter has ever been able to untangle. I lived with that secret for so long that silence became part of my skin, like a second shadow. But there came a day when the shadow could no longer be hidden, my son's wedding day. For decades, I locked my words away. I thought keeping quiet was the only way to survive, that if I never spoke, the wounds would stop bleeding. But I learned too late that silence doesn't protect you. It only postpones the pain. The past never disappears. It waits, lurking in memory, until a gesture, a look, or a voice wakes it all up at once. And for me, that awakening happened in the middle of music, flowers, and elegant clothes. Today, I live alone in a modest little house with white walls and the smell of jasmine at the front door. My routine is simple. I wake up early, make myself coffee, and sit outside watching children play on the sidewalk. Sometimes they knock on my door for a glass of cold water, sometimes just to smile and wave. In those moments, I feel a kind of peace I never knew as a girl, but also a pang, as if life itself is reminding me of everything I lost too soon. I am not a woman of many words. I learned to be cautious, to measure each phrase as carefully as one measures water for a fragile plant. And yet, this story insists on being told. It stirs inside me like a river breaking through dry earth. I find myself both afraid and relieved, because what I am about to say is not easy, but it is the only way to give meaning to so many years of silence. That day at my son's wedding, I wanted only to smile, to celebrate the second chance life had given me in the form of family. I expected no reproaches, no hostility. But when the bride looked at me and shouted that I wasn't invited, something inside me broke, not out of pain, but because her anger carried the same mark that had haunted me since childhood. I took a deep breath. I felt that forced calm I had learned as a girl, the same calm I used when the world collapsed and I had to pretend everything was fine. And at that moment I decided not to argue, not to beg, not to cry. I only spoke the words that had burned in my throat for decades. Before I leave, I want you to meet my special guest. I said it softly, as if I were opening a door that had been locked far too long. And then he walked in. His hair was gray now, but his cold eyes hadn't changed. The same eyes I knew when I was a helpless child. No one else in that hall suspected what was about to unfold. No one, except the bride, who fainted the moment she saw him. That was the night my silence shattered, not with words, but with the presence of the man who had destroyed our childhoods. I remember my childhood as a time of warm bread and damp earth. Our house stood in a small town in rural Kentucky, with narrow streets where everyone knew one another, and the church bells dictated the rhythm of our days. It was a wooden house with a roof that leaked when it rained hard, but to us it felt like the safest place in the world. Mornings carried the scent of wood smoke and fresh biscuits, and that smell would wake me even before the sun reached the hills. My mother had tireless hands. She kneaded dough with patience and love, while I, being the oldest, looked after my two younger brothers. They ran barefoot through the yard, kicking up dust and laughter that seemed endless. Sometimes I joined their games. Other times I stood guard, protecting them from reckless stunts. My mother often said my eyes were more like a mother's than a sister's, always watching, always caring. The creek nearby was our joy and escape. On Sundays, my father, tired but smiling after a week working construction, would take us to wade in the cold water. At first, it stole our breath, but soon we were splashing and chasing each other while frogs croaked along the bank. Those were the moments when I saw my father shed his weariness and my mother laugh openly, her voice echoing through the trees. Even school days held a special rhythm. The dirt road stretched long, but I carried my notebook tucked under my arm with pride. Letters fascinated me. How they combined into words, words into thoughts, like little miracles scratched onto paper. Every afternoon, returning home, I helped my mother shell beans or fold clean laundry. Learning and working blended together, and that balance made me feel useful, rooted in my family's life. Winters were harsh, but the warmth inside our home softened them. My mother filled a big pot with hearty stew that always seemed to stretch far enough, even when neighbors came over. At night, the glow of a kerosene lamp lit our table, while my father told the stories from his youth, tales tinged with pride and melancholy. We listened as though each word was a seed that might grow inside us. Holidays transformed our little town. Flags and ribbons were strung across porches, fiddles and guitars played in the square, and women wore their finest dresses. I loved to watch the dances, even if I was too shy to join. The music throbbed through me, making me believe the world was bigger than our four walls, bigger than our small patch of land. Neighbors looked out for one another. If we ran out of bread, someone shared theirs. If firewood was scarce, someone brought a bundle. That sense of community made me believe we were safe, that no one could ever be truly alone. My brothers grew up with that certainty, and I held on to it like a hidden charm. Sometimes I slipped, away to the wheat fields, where the wind bent the stalks into golden waves. Lying on my back, I stared at the endless sky, letting my mind wander. I dreamed of traveling, of learning, of discovering what lay beyond our town. I didn't know then that my fate would not be to explore wide horizons, but to survive in a place that would turn into a prison. My mother taught me old songs as we washed clothes at the creek. They spoke of lost loves and hopes that never died. I hummed along, trying to memorize each verse, each tone. Those simple melodies made life feel beautiful, woven out of small rituals and ordinary moments. My father, though stern, carried a generous heart. He came home with hands rough from cement and stone, yet still found time to lift us onto his shoulders or give us a tired but genuine smile. I admired him deeply, though his silences sometimes frightened me. After hard days, he would withdraw into himself, and though I sensed he carried burdens he never shared, I didn't dare ask. School became my secret refuge. There I wasn't burdened by chores beyond learning. One teacher in particular looked at me with kindness and once told me, "You have the eyes of a dreamer." That sentence etched itself into me, a reminder that my thoughts could carry me farther than the walls of our home. The yard was full of flowers, especially red geraniums my mother tended carefully. Their bright colors seemed like shields against sadness. I watched her whisper to the plants as if they were old friends. From her, I learned that even in silence, living things could listen and answer back with beauty. My brothers were my greatest joy. We invented kingdoms with sticks and stones, building castles in our imaginations. They trusted me for everything, and I carried that role of protector without complaint. At night, as they slept, I often gazed at them, wishing their innocence could last forever. The smells of childhood remain sharp in my memory. Bread hot from the oven, clothes scented by sunshine, the tang of smoke from burning wood in winter. Each fragrance was an invisible embrace, a promise that tomorrow would bring something familiar and safe. Life in the town moved slowly, almost lazily. Horse-drawn wagons creaked past, bells rang from the church tower, vendors called out from the street. All of it blended into a quiet symphony that I learned to love. Even though we were poor, I never felt deprived. My childhood was made of simple joys, gestures, glances, words that carried more weight than material things. I needed nothing more than that to feel happiness. Looking back, I see those years as a fragile oasis before the storm, a time of warmth and tenderness that unknowingly prepared me for the darkness ahead. Perhaps that's why I still remember them so vividly, because they were my last shelter before the collapse. And it's that contrast between the sweetness of my early years and the shadow that would soon fall that makes my heart tremble even now. It felt eternal back then, but it shattered too soon, teaching me that joy is as fragile as a glass lamp glowing in the night. The first crack in our home came like a whisper nobody wanted to hear. My mother grew ill. At first it was only fatigue, a cough that wouldn't leave, nights when she couldn't rise from bed. I watched her fight the fever, sweat soaking her forehead, and clung to the hope that, like always, she would recover, return to her baking and her songs. But this time, the illness was stronger than her tireless hands. The days turned heavy and gray. No more scent of biscuits from the oven, no more humming at the creek. The house filled with a weighty silence, with hushed prayers and unspoken fears. I was only 11, but I stepped into her role, cooking what little I could, tucking in my brothers at night, convincing myself she would get better soon. Deep inside, I knew I was lying to myself. The morning she died, the church bells tolled slowly, each strike like a blow to my chest. The whole town came to say goodbye, and I stood there dry-eyed as though my body had run out of tears. My brothers didn't understand. One clung to my dress, the other asked why Mama wouldn't wake up. I had no answers for them, only an aching silence. With her gone, our house lost its center. My father, already a quiet man, became even more withdrawn. He spent hours staring at the floor, his calloused hands trembling when he thought no one was watching. I longed to embrace him, but something in his grief kept me away. There was an abyss between his pain and mine, one we never managed to bridge. Neighbors tried to help. They brought bread, offered to watch the boys, whispered their condolences. Their kindness filled the table for a moment, but it could not fill the emptiness she left behind. The warmth of her laughter, the scent of soap clinging to her clothes, the way she looked at us as if we were the most precious thing in the world, all of it vanished overnight. That was when my father made the decision that changed everything. He invited a distant relative to live with us. He introduced him as someone trustworthy, a man respected in town, known for his hard work and good word. People welcomed him as if he were a savior, arriving to hold up a family in ruins. No one suspected what his presence would bring. At first it seemed like relief. He helped with heavy chores, spoke kindly in public, and wore the mask of generosity. I told myself it might be good, that perhaps his presence would steady us. But something in me recoiled. His eyes carried a coldness that unsettled me, though he never said anything openly wrong. My brothers, too young to notice, embraced him quickly. They laughed at his tricks, climbed into his arms, accepted him without hesitation. I stood apart, cautious. To them, he was a strong, dependable man. To me, he was a stranger whose shadow seemed to grow each day. The absence of my mother became unbearable. Without her songs, without her bread, without her steady love, the house felt hollow. And into that hollowness stepped this man, whose voice filled the spaces where laughter once lived. What was once a home now felt like a place rearranged for him, no longer truly ours. And though I couldn't name it yet, I sensed the truth. My mother's death hadn't only left us motherless, it had opened the door for a different kind of darkness to enter, one that would claim years of my childhood and silence my voice for far too long. The man arrived with a small suitcase and an air of solemnity. My father introduced him as a distant uncle, someone we could trust, someone who would help us through hard times. In town, people greeted him with respect, calling him hard-working, honorable, a man whose word meant something. To them, he was a blessing. To me, From the first moment, his eyes felt like ice pressing against my skin. He quickly began making decisions in the household. He commented on meals, on our schedules, on how I should behave with my brothers. At first I thought he was trying to bring order to the chaos left by my mother's death, but as days passed, his words stopped sounding like advice and started sounding like commands. My father, worn down by grief and labor, never objected. He simply nodded, letting this man settle into a place that wasn't his. I was only 11, but I noticed the shift. Before, even with little, we had warmth, a rhythm, a fragile balance. Now the house felt crowded with tension. My father spoke less, the uncle spoke more. My brothers, too young to see, simply adapted. But I began to sense something darker in his presence, something that left me uneasy every time his gaze lingered. The signs were small at first. A hand resting on my shoulder too long, a compliment said with an odd tone. The heavy silence when we were alone in the kitchen. I didn't have words for it, but my body understood. I tried to avoid being alone with him, but our house was small and escaping him was nearly impossible. In public he was flawless. He greeted neighbors with respect, helped the elderly carry groceries, even spoke in church like a man of wisdom. No one imagined that inside our home, his voice turned sharper, his eyes colder. I learned to force a smile when people were watching, to keep anyone from suspecting the truth. His phrases were always wrapped in respectability. A young lady should lower her eyes. Don't answer back when an adult speaks. Your duty is to obey. Each sentence was another stone in the wall of silence he built around me. My brothers, too young to be targets, remained blissfully unaware. But for me, every word chipped away at my freedom. My father seemed grateful for his presence. He believed this man was helping us stay afloat, but I felt trapped. I no longer sang in the yard or ran to the creek with my brothers. Every gesture was monitored, every step weighed down by the thought of his scrutiny. Punishments began disguised as discipline. If I forgot a chore, his tone grew stern. If dinner was late, he scolded me with a calmness more terrifying than any yell. At first he didn't need to raise a hand. His eyes alone were enough to crush me. I became quick, quiet, careful, learning how to move without attracting his wrath. When my father was home, the uncle asked only small things of me. Fetch water, sweep the floor, watch the boys, normal tasks. But when my father was gone, those requests turned heavier, his words sharper, his presence suffocating. It felt as though he was testing me, seeing how far he could bend me to his will. Nights were the worst. I would hear his footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate, like a reminder that the house belonged to him. Sometimes he stopped outside my door, and I would hold my breath, praying he would move on. The sound of floorboards creaking under his weight haunted me even in my sleep. My only refuge was my brothers. I distracted them with games, tucked them in, with stories, and held them close at night. They thought I was simply a caring sister. They didn't know I was shielding them from the shadow that crept deeper into our lives. One afternoon at the creek, while they splashed happily, I sat on the bank and cried silently. I couldn't tell anyone, not my father. He trusted this man blindly, not the neighbors. They revered him. My tears slipped into the water, carried away by the current, but the heaviness inside me remained. He began finding excuses to keep me alone, sending my brothers outside to play while he asked me to help indoors. I complied, but every time I felt my skin harden, as if trying to protect itself from his nearness. Once, he gripped my arm too tightly, smiling that false smile he wore in public. He told me I needed to learn to be more submissive, that respectable girls didn't talk too much. His fingers left bruises on my skin, but worse than that was the realization that no one would believe me. To everyone else, he was a model man. His words were poisoned with control. You're strong, but don't forget your place. Your father trusts me with this house, and that includes you. Sentences like that burrowed into my mind, convincing me I had no right to resist. It was violence without fists, but it cut just as deeply. I dreamed of my mother often. In my sleep, she was alive, kneading dough, smiling at me. I ran into her arms seeking refuge, but I always woke alone, with the echo of his footsteps filling the house. It was a cruel reminder that I had no safe place left. Neighbors still admired him. They told my father how fortunate he was to have such a reliable man in the home. I wanted to scream the truth, to tear down the mask he wore, but my throat tightened every time, sealed by fear. My silence was my shield, but also my cage. I crafted small strategies to survive, entering the kitchen only if others were around, inventing chores outdoors to avoid being cornered, calculating each movement like a pawn on a chessboard. Every day felt like a battle fought in silence, and yet nobody noticed, not my brothers, hidden in their innocence, nor my father, drowning in his grief. To the world, everything looked fine. Only I knew that each day was another fight against an enemy who wore the mask of a savior. The uncle didn't need to strike me to enforce his power. His presence was enough. His eyes, his words, his control over our routines. Every moment reminded me that I was trapped in a web of silence. My childhood no longer mine, but his territory. As time passed, I realized something devastating. The girl who once laughed in the creek, who dreamed of traveling, who played freely with her brothers, was fading. In her place stood another girl, quiet, watchful, fearful. A child learning too soon what it means to live in fear. Day after day, his shadow rooted itself deeper in our lives. There was no escape. The home that once sheltered me had become his domain, and I, unwillingly, had become the keeper of a terrible secret no one else could see. Each morning became a test of endurance. I woke before anyone else, fixing breakfast, sweeping the yard, boiling water, all in hopes of avoiding his disapproval. Routine became my camouflage, obedience my shield. While my brothers still slept peacefully, I was already alert, moving carefully through the house like a soldier on constant watch. I learned to control even my breathing. If I spoke too much, he scolded me. If I stayed too quiet, he accused me of defiance. I lived on a tightrope where any misstep could lead to punishment. My life was no longer mine. Every gesture, every word, calculated to anticipate his reactions. Fear lodged itself in my body in silent ways. I developed insomnia, lying awake, listening for each creak of the floorboards, waiting for his footsteps in the hall. When I heard them pause outside my door, I held my breath until he moved on. Some nights I didn't sleep at all, my heart pounding so hard I feared it might wake my brothers. My brothers remained innocent. They didn't see, didn't understand. I shielded them with excuses. Don't be loud, he doesn't like it. Go outside, I have chores. They obeyed without suspicion. I hugged them whenever I could, pouring into them the warmth I myself was starving for. Their innocence became my lifeline. I began hiding my bruises, long sleeves in summer, scarves wrapped tightly, quick lies about falling in the yard. Nobody asked questions, because in town his word carried more weight than mine. I learned to disguise pain with fake smiles, to invent stories quicker than the truth could surface. Silence became both my refuge and my prison. Keeping everything inside gave me the illusion of control, that at least my secrets were mine. But silence also bound me, gagged me, kept me from asking for help. Sometimes I wanted to scream, but the cry never made it past my throat. My body changed under the weight of fear. I walked hunched, avoided eye contact, hid beneath oversized clothes. I wished I could disappear, become invisible. The mirror reflected someone I didn't recognize, a girl with hollow eyes, too old for her age. Still, I forced myself to smile when others were near. At school, my teacher began noticing. She said my notebooks were messy, that my eyes looked tired. I brushed it off, saying I stayed up late, caring for my brothers. She stroked my hair softly, not pushing further. Maybe she guessed, maybe she didn't. Either way, I couldn't bring myself to speak. At home, he took charge of everything. what we ate, when we left, how I wore my hair. My father, blinded by gratitude, let him rule. He often said, we couldn't make it without him. Hearing those words froze my insides. It felt like a life sentence. I created secret hiding spots. Beneath floorboards, I tucked away letters I never sent, filled with the words I couldn't say aloud. I wrote about my fear, my rage, my exhaustion. Those hidden pages were the only place I could still exist freely, even if no one ever read them. Nights pressed hardest on me. I often crawled into bed with my brothers, pretending I was afraid of storms, when in truth I only craved their warmth. They would wrap sleepy arms around me, unaware that they were protecting me from breaking apart. My hands shook constantly. When cooking, sweeping, even writing, I lived bracing for the unexpected, never knowing when his words might sharpen or his grip might tighten. The anticipation itself was punishment. To the town, I looked like a perfectly obedient child. So mature for her age, they said. So well behaved. They praised the very obedience that was crushing me. Outwardly I smiled, but inside I was shrinking into nothing. My dreams withered. I no longer thought of traveling or learning. My only goal was to make it through another day. Survival replaced hope. Protecting my brothers became my reason for enduring, the only meaning I could find. I became a master of excuses. A bruise was always from a fall, the dark circles from nights watching over the boys. Each lie was another brick in the wall I built around myself, a wall that kept help away as much as it hid the truth. The kitchen turned into my prison. Hours spent peeling potatoes, scrubbing pots, scrubbing floors again and again. He called it teaching me discipline, but it was only another way of breaking me. And I, too tired to resist, obeyed. Sometimes I fantasized about running away. I pictured myself sprinting down the road, vanishing into the fields, never looking back. But then I'd see my brothers asleep, their small faces peaceful, and I knew I couldn't leave them behind. They were my anchor. The marks on my body multiplied, but the ones on my soul cut deeper. I began mistrusting all men, even those who had done me no harm. Every glance, every gesture felt like a threat. I lived on edge, always bracing for danger. Sometimes he acted fatherly in public, placing a hand on my shoulder, speaking of me, as if I were his responsibility. The hypocrisy made me want to scream. To the world, he was a protector. To me, he was a predator, and I had to hold that contradiction inside me, unspoken. Time crawled. Each day dragged like a chain around my neck. My brothers grew in joy and innocence, and I envied them, wishing I could live in their bubble. But I knew my fate was different, to be the shield that absorbed the shadow so it wouldn't touch them. Winter nights were the hardest. I curled under threadbare blankets, but it wasn't the cold of my body that hurt most. It was the cold of loneliness. Sometimes I whispered to the moon, the only witness I trusted, asking silently why I had been chosen for this burden. My thoughts scared me. Some nights, I wished I could simply fall asleep and never wake again. But then I'd hear my brothers breathing softly beside me, and I clung to that sound, like a rope keeping me alive. I couldn't give up, not while they still needed me. Every gesture became survival. How I placed dishes on the table, how quickly I moved, when I spoke, and when I stayed silent. Even my smallest movements were shaped by fear of triggering him. I lived like someone walking through a minefield, careful not to step wrong. Deep inside, I still hoped for a miracle, that someone might notice, that the truth might escape somehow. But each day passed the same. My silence fed his power, making him stronger while I grew smaller. My childhood slipped away in that silence. While other girls played jump rope or dreamed of dances, I was busy hiding pain, carrying burdens too heavy for a child, surviving in shadows. I grew up too fast, forced by a secret that consumed me. Silence became my identity. I was no longer the girl who laughed at the creek, who dreamed of faraway places. I was the quiet girl, the obedient one. And though silence shielded me, it also killed me slowly, because every unsaid word was another piece of me lost forever. Over time, something inside me began to shift. The fear never left, but I started paying closer attention to him. I no longer just obeyed blindly. I studied him. I learned his moods, the words that softened him, the gestures that set him off. It was like decoding a secret language, one that I used to protect myself. My brothers remained my anchor. They didn't know what was happening, but their laughter and innocence kept me standing. Every time I tucked them into bed, I reminded myself I had to survive, not just for me, but for them. Protecting them gave me a sense of purpose stronger than my despair. I discovered small acts of rebellion. Sometimes I'd deliberately delay a chore just to see his irritation. Other times I hid things he asked for, forcing him to search. They were tiny gestures, invisible to others, but to me they were sparks of resistance, proof that I hadn't completely surrendered. At school, my teacher kept watching me. One day she stopped me after class and asked softly if everything was all right. At home, I forced a shaky smile and said yes. But that question, that small act of noticing, gave me strength. For the first time, I felt less invisible. There was also the neighbor across the street, a widow who often gave me bread or invited me into her yard. She didn't press me with questions, only looked at me with quiet tenderness. I accepted her kindness like stolen breaths of fresh air. They didn't last long, but they reminded me the world wasn't all cruelty. I kept writing, but my letters grew sharper, no longer just confessions of pain. They became declarations. I will not give up. This will not last forever. One day the truth will be known. Writing those words felt like staking a claim on my own survival. I also began fighting back inside my head. When he told me I was worthless, I repeated silently, I matter. I think. I exist. That inner voice was faint, but it kept me alive. It was my secret rebellion, the only place he could never reach. I grew more protective of my brothers. When he called them, I invented excuses, sending them outside before they could get too close to him. They didn't question me, trusting my authority. Without realizing, I became their shield, their translator of danger. Some nights, I forced myself to look in the mirror. It wasn't easy. I saw a tired girl, eyes hollow, hair unkempt. But I held my own gaze, telling myself I was still there. That act, small as it was, became a victory. I learned to read silence like a map. By the way he hung his jacket, by the heaviness of his footsteps, I could predict his mood. That knowledge, though painful, gave me a kind of power. Anticipation became survival, and survival was its own defiance. One day, the widow neighbor gave me a small notebook, saying she had extra paper. I hid it carefully and began to draw as well as write. I filled its pages with fields, rivers, and smiling faces I invented. That secret world gave me air to breathe, a life no one could take. My body, though marked by fear, also found ways to endure. I discovered hiding places, behind the stove, under the stairs, among the trees in the yard. They weren't escapes, but they were moments of safety, precious minutes where I could feel unseen. And it was in those stolen spaces of safety that I realized something crucial. No matter how much control he claimed, there was a core inside me he could never touch, a spark that belonged only to me. As long as I held on to that spark, hope would never fully die. That knowledge didn't free me yet, but it armed me. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was watching, resisting, waiting, and deep down, I began to sense that one day I would find the strength to break the silence for good. The tension that had built for years finally erupted one winter afternoon, when the sky was heavy and rain hammered against the roof. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when he entered, his expression darker than usual. My brothers were outside playing in the yard, unaware that everything was about to change. The air felt thick, like the storm outside had seeped into our walls. He ordered me closer, his tone leaving no room for hesitation. I moved slowly, my legs trembling beneath me. The moment his hand clamped around my arm, I knew this time was different. His gaze wasn't one of scolding. It was ownership. That was when I realized he no longer wanted just control. He wanted complete submission. Fear froze me for an instant, but then something inside ignited. I couldn't let him take what little remained of me. All the years of swallowed screams, all the buried rage, surged upward. For the first time in my life, I let out a cry, not of fear alone, but of resistance. The scream ripped through the silence of the house. My brothers rushed in, wide-eyed, as they saw me struggling against him. Their innocence was shattered in that instant, as they witnessed the battle I had hidden from them for so long. He tried to silence me, tightening his grip, but I screamed louder, my voice carrying years of pain. Neighbors, alarmed by the commotion, began knocking on the door. He released me abruptly, panic flashing across his face, though his eyes still burned with fury. "Say nothing," he hissed. "Tell them it was nothing." But there was no going back. My silence had already shattered. I opened the door with trembling hands. There stood the widow from across the street, her face etched with worry. "What happened?" she asked. My voice failed, but my tears and the bruise on my arm spoke for me. He rushed to explain. An accident, a fall, a misunderstanding. But my neighbor's eyes stayed fixed on mine, and in that gaze I knew she saw the truth. That was the moment I understood I was no longer completely alone. She didn't press me for details, but she took my hand gently, pulling me a step away from him. The gesture was small, yet it felt like someone had lifted a weight I'd carried for years. That night he was silent at the dinner table. His eyes followed me with a sharper edge than ever, as if warning me of consequences. But I was different now. Something had shifted. I had raised my voice, and nothing he could do would erase that fact. My brothers looked at me with confusion, but also with a newfound reliance. They didn't understand everything, but they clung to me with a trust that deepened after that day. I wrapped them in blankets, stroked their hair, whispering promises I wasn't sure I could keep. It would be all right. In the following days, his orders grew harsher, his presence more suffocating. But I had tasted a fragment of power. I began responding with firm monosyllables, holding his gaze for seconds longer than before. Tiny acts of defiance, but enough to show him I wasn't fully broken. That resistance began to spread. My brothers started avoiding him, refusing small tasks he demanded. Without realizing it, they mirrored my defiance. The control he once wielded so effortlessly was beginning to crack. One afternoon, when he raised his hand as if to strike, I didn't flinch. I stared directly into his eyes. For a brief second, his arm wavered. He stepped back, as though startled by my refusal to cower. That was when I realized his greatest weapon had been my fear, and now he saw it slipping. That realization became my armor. I was still trapped in his house, still under his shadow, but I was no longer the silent, submissive girl. I had found my voice, my will, my defiance, and though the danger remained, I knew the day of true freedom was drawing closer, and in that fragile victory, I felt something I hadn't in years. Hope. The end didn't come suddenly, but like a crack that slowly widened until nothing could hold. After that scream, the balance shifted. He still lived under our roof for a time, but his grip on me was weaker. The neighbor came more often under the excuse of bringing food or checking on the boys. Her presence was a lantern in the darkness, proof that the silence around me was no longer absolute. One night, with my heart trembling, I whispered the truth to her. Not in detail, just enough. "I'm scared to be alone with him." That was all it took. Her eyes welled with tears, and she promised, in her quiet way, that she would not leave me unprotected. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of my secret lessen. At first my father refused to see. Shame and pride blinded him, but the neighbor's persistence, the whispers from others, and my own unyielding silence slowly broke through his denial. I will never forget his face, the day he finally understood. It was as if a dam burst, grief and rage colliding in his eyes. The uncle left not long after. No one spoke the truth aloud, but rumors spread through town. His reputation began to crumble. For me, there was no courtroom, no official justice. But his absence was enough to give me air, enough to make the house livable again. My silence had been broken, and with it, his power. Years later, I built a new life. I married, had children, and with them learned that love could exist without fear. Every hug, every gentle word I gave them was what I had been denied. I was not perfect, but I tried to make my home the shelter I had once longed for. Still, the past never vanished. It stayed with me like a scar that no longer bled, but remained tender to the touch. And on my son's wedding day, when I saw the bride collapse at the sight of the man who had once haunted me, I realized my story was not only mine. The shadow had stretched into her life too. That night, standing in front of them all, I understood that hiding was over. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to shout the whole truth. His mere presence was enough to expose him, enough to prove that silence cannot bury the past forever. If you've stayed with me to the end, thank you for listening to what I carried for so many decades. If this story has touched you, please like this video, subscribe, and share it, so more people may find courage to break their own silence. And tell me in the comments, what did you feel while walking with me through this memory? Your voice now is part of my freedom too.